How do you see the financial vice president's relationship to groups on campus?
So I think that the financial vice president has a lot of responsibility in terms of supporting groups on campus, because obviously as a union we support our students in forming groups and in creating activities through those groups, and a lot of that happens through funding. So because ratified societies can apply for funding, I think that it's up to the FVP to make sure that the society's budget has the right amount of money in it, and that we are allocating funding in a way that makes sense. That was a vague term, but in a way that is consistent and is fair through Finance Committee.
Thank you. What do you tend to do to make sure groups are aware of what funds they are to support?
What I want to do is keep that updated on the KSU website, as well as hopefully putting it in TWAC. This year there's been some really cool stuff going on with putting in TWAC how many societies we've ratified at council and also how much funding we've allocated. So I want to keep that going and kind of just keep like a running tally of like how much money is remaining in the budget in different areas. Obviously, even though the budget isn't an exact statement of how much money is in our bank account, just like keeping people up to date on how we're doing in relation to our budget and how much money we've spent. But yeah, mostly through the website would be a great place to have that.
Cool, thank you. And a question in a similar vein. As FVP, you are often the only student on committees which will make recommendations regarding student fees such as tuition. How do you plan on advocating for accessible education when the university is in a tight space financially?
Great stuff. Well, I have spent the last year on the Board of Governors, so being one of only 3 students in a room full of people who are trying to pass tuition fee increases every year. And I also have spent the last few months on the college task force, which was a task force struck by the board to create a plan for long-term financial stability of the university, and myself and one other student are on that committee, but I attended a lot of meetings alone as well. So I do have experience actually being in those rooms, and I think that the strongest thing is to have done the research beforehand, because a lot of times the administration or the people who actually are supposed to be taking care of the finances of our university aren't going to have done the research. So knowing my own lived experience as a student and what the students around me are saying, and then coming into that space confidently and not being willing to back down. Whoa, people are coming to the room. When kind of faced with the rhetoric that's going to be thrown about how education is not a right and about how our university needs to increase tuition, increase fees to survive, because we know that there are ways to have a long-term plan that doesn't involve compromising student welfare.
Thank you. That's it.
Are there questions from like people who aren't here?
Ace in it. Thanks, Zoe.
Yes. I was just waiting to see if other people.
Oh, okay.
I thank you. I thought I was going to see your speech. I don't know what. I'm obviously just like out of it today, but that's okay. My question is about the executive as a whole, specifically honoraria, but maybe could be broader than that.
Okay.
I've asked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, our executive positions are each paid an honorarium of $4,400 for their term, which is ludicrously small. It works out to something like $4, $5, maybe $6 an hour if you actually try to work out the hours, but that's not really a good way to measure it because there's so much work that goes into being on the exec, as you know from having been a board rep for a year. And like I think that executives should be paid more for the work that they do and like compensated properly, but I think even more than that, the problem is that it makes those positions inaccessible to people who don't come from financial backgrounds that would allow them to do a position like that. So people who have to already work 2 jobs to be able to pay rent and pay for tuition can't maybe run for the exec because they don't have time to be paid so little. So I see that as like a huge, huge accessibility problem. And at other student unions, which are admittedly larger, the exec are paid very differently. For example, the DSU's executive altogether are paid more than twice as much as the KSU's entire operating budget. Mm-hmm. Obviously that's very different because DAL's huge compared to us. But I'm just wondering what you would do, not necessarily to raise honoraria immediately, but to make those positions more accessible in your role specifically as FVP.
Okay, thank you for your question. That is definitely a really big issue, and it's difficult coming from like a small student union where you don't necessarily have the resources to be paying people what they deserve. So I think that some steps have been made this year that have been helpful towards accessibility of the executive, specifically that we've amended the bylaws so that honorary paid out monthly rather than end of the year. So I think that was like one way that the exec this year worked to do that. So I'd like to continue to try to find ways that we can hopefully make positions more accessible, even if our budget isn't necessarily going to be increasing, because I'm definitely not in support of just like raising students' fees just so I can have more money. That's not really my thing. So it's something that I would want to talk more with Finance Committee and with the executive about. Yeah, I'm going to be honest, like I don't have an answer for you right now. But I totally acknowledge that's a really important question, and our union's accessibility is really important, especially when we're seeing like a lack of representation from students of different economic backgrounds in our executive and in our councillor positions.
Cool, thank you.
Nice.
Any other questions from the humans amalgamated in the room?
Can I ask a question? Okay. So as FVP, again, you're also a member of the executive as a whole, and a big problem that has been recurring, I'm assuming, with our union is lack of engagement, or like students are just unaware a lot of the time of the union's activities. What is, maybe like if you have any ideas of how to increase membership engagement, or yeah, I guess.
I think that it would be really good for us, like as an executive here, to work on kind of organizing events that are like from the KSU more, because I think that like a lot of what we do in terms of like, again, I'm speaking in terms of funding here because I'm running for FVP, is a lot of what we do is funding societies so that they can put on events, and that's really, really awesome. That's super important, but I think that sometimes those events don't necessarily get like related back to the KSU. People don't always know, like, the KSU did this for me. They think like, oh, this like really awesome society is doing this thing, and they don't know that like that's being supported through the work that we're doing as a union. So I think that anywhere that we can like make those connections is really good.
Cool, thanks.
Last call. Thank you, Zoe, for answering these questions.